Welcome to our webinar on employee experience and organization agility with Steve Goldberg and PeopleSoft. I'm Raviola, and this is CMOS Cloud. As some of you might already know, we're an independent software company focusing on the design, development, implementation, and technical support of sophisticated enterprise solutions. We have experience in building, implementing, and delivering employee experience cloud solutions. For a decade now, we have been delivering integrations on the public cloud platforms with technical and business support from our partner teams at SAP, Microsoft, and Oracle. SAP accepted us into a cloud development accelerator in 2013. In 2018, we won the SAP Pinnacle Award. In 2020, we became an SAP endorsed partner and joined SAP's Premium Partnership Program. We're also a founding member of the Partner Advisory Council for Innovation Group and work alongside other top SIs and ISVs on building competitive cloud and AI offerings. Before we kick off with today's agenda, here's what you need to know. You can use the Q&A function to pose questions. After Steve's presentation and Q&A session with our CEO, Filip Misovsky, we'll select a few audience questions to be answered at the end of the session. For anyone who wasn't able to attend or has to leave early, we'll send out the webinar recording to all participants after the webinar. Our featured speaker today is Steve Goldberg, who is an independent HR tech industry advisor and board advisor. Steve Goldberg is a top HR tech influencer with 30+ years of experience on all sides of process and technology. He's been an HR executive on 3 continents, serving as an HCM product strategy leader and primary spokesperson at PeopleSoft, and co-founding boutique tech and change management firms. Since 2006, Steve has been advising and delivering thought leadership around HCM solutions and has served as HCM practice leader at Bersin and Ventana Research. Okay, on the host side, we have Filip Misovsky, who is the CEO of CMOS Cloud and an accomplished business executive who has worked with large enterprise organizations and partners worldwide. Filip has worked in a variety of engineering, UX and design, product management, field and marketing roles throughout his career. He spent over 20 years at SAP and Oracle, the market leaders in business application software and technology, gaining a detailed overview of HR technologies. Here's our agenda today. On today's webinar, we'll talk about how to develop an agile organization and what tools help, how to improve employee experience and secure your organization's talents, and lastly, how to reassure your workforce that agile is not the opposite of stable. With that said, Steve, thank you for joining us today.
Raviola, thanks so much, and thanks to my host and sponsor here, CMOS Cloud. Looking forward to chatting with Filip in a few minutes, and thanks everybody for tuning in. Let me share my screen here. Sorry, I am sharing, right? Yeah.
Yep, yes, you're sharing.
All right, thanks again, everybody. So let me start with one of my favorite topics for those of you who have listened to me in the past or read some of my content, blog posts, articles, white papers, etc. Organizational agility has been, for at least 10 years, one of my favorite themes, even before we kind of started to deal with what I call the COVID era. And so let me start with giving you kind of my thumbnail definition of organizational agility, and then kind of round it out with some research snippets and data points. Yeah, I'm going to take probably 8 or 9 minutes with just a few slides, and then we'll get into the more interactive part of this. So I defined organizational agility in a very straightforward manner, right? The ability to be out in front of both business risks and business opportunities. Now, if you compare that to kind of some of the common definitions and articulations of organizational agility, it's a little bit different. Why? Because the word pivot is often used. Organizational agility, it's almost used like synonymously with the ability to pivot. I take it further. So I'm consciously talking about the ability to be out in front, which implies be able to foresee what those business risks and business opportunities might be. Case in point, Blockbuster Video. Well, they were able to pivot, you could argue, their business model of making most of their revenue on late fees. They eventually changed it. Unfortunately, it was too late. Similar situation with BlackBerry and probably countless others. They did pivot, but it was too late. And that's why I stress being able to foresee the need to pivot, the best options when you are pivoting, right? And again, I do focus a lot on business risks and opportunities. A little bit later on, I'm going to mention the term I coined. I think I coined it, called adaptive HCM. But I'll just tell you right now, adaptive HCM is kind of a flavor of organizational agility, but it relates specifically to the workforce. So it's being out in front of business risks and opportunities with optimal workforce actions and decisions. And another part of organizational agility, and I'm kind of borrowing a model or a framework from Boston Consulting Group years ago when I read their framework on organizational agility and change management, and particularly the front end of change management, which is assessing organizational readiness. They kind of broke it down into these three little words here, concepts: ready, willing, and able. And they kind of defined it as ready is the workforce, your employees kind of understand, they can intellectually understand why a certain change or set of changes is needed. Willing is they support it. They understand it and they support it, which implies they see themselves in the context of that change. And able is not only seeing themselves, but they can visualize being able to be very successful in the context of those changes. So shifting over to the left side of the screen, the operative word in the first couple of bullet points from some fairly well-known industry sources, the operative word is really significant. I say that because look at the significant difference between, being able to execute in a very agile way and not in terms of financial results. So points 2 and 3 relate to that. The first point is the significant gap between recognizing and believing that organizational agility is critical to business success, but yet only a quarter of organizations consider themselves highly agile. And the other points, just to round out the slide, more than a quarter of executives say their organization is at a competitive disadvantage because it's not agile enough. And finally, most companies want to be more agile. That's like a motherhood and apple pie statement, but 59% don't have the cultural attributes. Both Philip and I think a lot about organizational culture. Seamless Cloud, I think, is one of the foundational pillars, is focusing on organizational culture and helping customers kind of leverage culture for competitive advantage. So we're going to come back to that one. So here's a kind of a framework slide. That's as Ravi Orlis said, I spent some time at Bersin and Ventana Research the last 4 years before I transitioned back to being on my own. So like most analysts out there, we come up with frameworks to more kind of clearly and easily articulate concepts. But this framework includes a dimension that I introduced way back when I was at PeopleSoft 20 years ago. And this is my alternative ERP acronym, if you will, and it stands for engagement, retention, and productivity. So I related what I consider some of the major drivers of employee experience on the left to engagement, retention, and productivity. And you can pretty much see that all those drivers are get an across the board check mark except for 2. And just in the interest of time, why aren't I saying that HCM systems and tools driving retention in particular? In my roughly almost going on 40 years now in and around HCM, HR tech, I haven't seen really kind of empirical data or through my own personal experiences, clear evidence that HCM systems and tools are driving retention, but I definitely see evidence that they're driving engagement, which is very correlated, as we know, with productivity. And on the comp and benefits row, again, I don't see comp and benefits, and most of the research would bear out that view that comp and benefits employee engagement. In fact, I reported directly to 5 different CHROs in my corporate HR days. I spent 15 years in corporate HR, US and Europe. And one of those CHROs used to say to me, because I actually had the opportunity to run the year-end bonus process, that compensation is for people, there's as good enough chance that compensation will be a disincentive as an incentive, particularly if you're looking at and counting on compensation singularly to drive engagement. It has to be part of a total package and total experience. And speaking of experience, yes, when we think about employee experience, I've seen definitions like, what are employees thinking about, feeling, and doing at work? Not a bad kind of framework to be thinking about that, but I take it further. I view it as really a strategy. It's a mission critical strategy. It's a mindset of the organization, but it's not just confined to senior management or the HR department. It's a mindset of the enterprise, and it's supported by your partners. I mentioned personalization. When I think about some of the advances relative to AI and machine learning and human capital management, personalization is clearly one of them. We think about it relative to learning, candidate relationship management, other areas. But how do we achieve personalization at scale? Obviously, technology is critical there. I mentioned culture and communications, really, really important. And as we know, and it's kind of common knowledge now, both culture and communications need to feature transparency, and both must be tangible. It's not just we want to have a great culture, or that enterprise, that organization has a great culture. Dimensionalize it, make it tangible. And the last point is, and I'll relate it to customer experience, it's now also kind of universally understood that you cannot have a great customer experience without a great employee experience. So here's another one of those frameworks I developed, just a couple of more minutes, and then look forward to chatting with Philip here. So my employee journey framework, I'm not going to kind of discuss all 10 stages, but I want to highlight 3. So immersion, really important. So onboarding, I mean, in the days when I was in corporate HR, what were the activities that were emphasized? And I dare say still maybe unduly emphasized in some organizations today. Yes, it's very important to get employees onboarded in terms of payroll and employee benefits, understanding policies, completing kind of compliance-related tasks. But I call it immersion, and immersion is much more than that. It's getting immersed in the team, the culture, understanding how to navigate the organization. That's a lot broader. I call that strategic onboarding, and the distinction being the other important tasks I talked about are arguably more administrative in nature. Validate, 6, right? And by the way, I'm not contending here that every employee goes through all 10 stages or goes through them in this sequence, but in my experience, any employee within a certain organization is going to go through many of these. And I believe that if you're with an organization for more than a couple of years, you're probably going to experience stage 9, what I call the exploration stage, where you ask yourself, is there more out there? And you start with the organization you're in. And that's why it's so critical. Internal mobility is critical. The organization allowing you, exposing you to different parts of the organization, different roles, different skill sets, because the answer, presumably by that employer, is yes, explore, but we want you to explore here and stay here. A slide I created just a couple of weeks ago, and so you see, basically, it's a one-axis slide. X-axis being strategic value of different outcomes, and on the left, yeah, cost savings and efficiency gains, very important. Saving money leads to profitability it's important. But I will ask this maybe provocative question. Do we know a lot of organizations that actually ascended the ranks within their industry sector, mostly because they were able to save money or even capitalize and capture efficiency gains? I'm not minimizing the importance of that. But one thing I like to say is think about what allows an organization to ascend the ranks. I kind of coined a term, so I named it after myself, the Steve Goldberg Ascension Test. These capabilities allow an organization to ascend the ranks. Similar point around about the middle section here. All really impactful types of capabilities and outcomes. Really, these are outcomes. But let's go to the right-hand side. When we think about employee productivity, the way I look at it is, sorry about my throat, the most modest upticks in employee productivity can lead to millions of dollars in value creation. You just have to do the math. Think about a 5% uptick in revenue per employee. Round numbers, if it's 100,000 per employee, it goes to 105,000, that's 5%. Multiply that 5% times a 5,000 employee organization, that's 25 million in value creation, quite a bit. And so what I'm doing here is linking delivering a great employee experience and achieving a target culture to that. And in the box are some of the things I've already been talking about, and I'm going to come back later on in the discussion to managing change and strategic workforce planning. My last slide is this, ways that, let me take a drink, maybe I'll stop sounding like a frog. Ways that organizational agility and employee experience intersect, right? Moments that matter. We typically think of MTMs in relation to employees, but clearly moments that matter relates to organizations as well. And they really arguably are game-changing, potentially game-changing. And what are examples? M&As, going into a new line of business, going into a new geo market, corporate restructurings, major change management and transformational initiatives, all moments that matter for the organization. But, and there's the key word, the key kind of caveat here, there are moments that matter for the organization, they're potentially game-changing for the organization, but they absolutely impact employees. And employees are usually called upon to have an open mind about the changes and to receive communications and to really kind of process them without jumping to conclusions about how their job is going to change. And if reskilling or upskilling is needed, hopefully a lot of those employees view that as a major opportunity. Needs, interests, and goals have to be balanced, employee and employer, whether it's within the context of moments that matter or not. HR must be the hub of research. One of my friends, Dr. John Boudreau, wrote an article. It's someone I've been reading his stuff for 20 plus years. Check it out. It's on LinkedIn, I'm sure. But he talks about HR going forward needs to be a hub of research and experimentation, coming up with best practices that are not necessarily applied enterprise-wide, applied where they fit, and that's part of the research effort. Transparency is key in communications, and culture and comms communications is super important. So I'm going to stop there, and sorry if I'm a little bit over, and let me stop sharing. So here we go. Huh?
Okay. Wow, thank you. Thank you, Steve.
Sure, my pleasure. And now everybody knows what my desktop looks like. Sorry about that.
Very busy. Steve, great stuff. Can you guys hear me as well?
Yeah.
Yes. Hi, Philip.
Hi. So I'm honored, and also, just looking at the content that you just covered in 10, 15 minutes, I think that's worth like a week of material of webinars that we could go through. But the ones that just and really appreciate you having on with us. And one that struck me really kind of a nerve is this moment to matter for organizations. And you mentioned restructuring. I've never met an employee that felt positive about restructuring in my days in the corporate world. in the last 20 years, and that's definitely a missed opportunity because a lot of it is due to lack of good communication, good change management, and other practices to really to make this an opportunity for such a change to be a not only positive thing for the organization or the restructuring itself, but also for the employees.
Yeah.
And I can definitely share my good examples and bad examples of such restructuring, but definitely never a boring world in the corporate times when restructurings are happening every 6 to 12 months. Anyways, as we have also folks who are in large and small and mid-sized organization, I think they can all relate to these different moments that matter for employees, but also for organizations. So maybe just to get going, to tell a little bit about your advisory practice. You mentioned you were part of kind of a product development organization. You've transitioned to a more on operations side to be part of the public companies, working in the CHRO office, in different topics, total rewards and so on, and then moving into the kind of the analyst. So you've seen quite a lot from just those three angles, being a vendor to being a customer to being an analyst. And tell us how your insights connect to today's topic, and maybe give us a little bit of that.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Philip. Yes, I mean, long and short of it is, in terms of my practice, my advisory practice, I advise both end customers and solutions and services vendors in the HCM realm. And as you pointed out, thank you for doing that. I obviously try to use the different lenses that I can bring to bear. Maybe something maybe unique about me other than my personality, but bring to bear because I functioned on all sides of HCM and HR tech and HR. So so what I really tend to focus on behalf of customers is, as I alluded to it before, what really allows them to ascend the ranks within their industry vertical. And clearly, I, for years now, have been thinking that elevating organizational agility, as well as elevating the employee experience, are two avenues for ascending the ranks within their industry sector.
Excellent. That leads us to the next question. As you're talking to the different customers and also hearing from vendors, what are these big industry topics? You mentioned organizational agility, employee experience. You talked even a little bit about AI, the adaptive HCM, right? So are these the big next things that also the Josh Persons of the world are talking about as part of the next gen HCM system? So tell us a little bit about what you see of the biggest relevance today.
Yeah, well, I had the great fortune to work with Josh about a dozen years ago. Yeah, so I'm an avid reader of his stuff, like most of us are. And so he also is talking about organizational agility, so it kind of validates how I'm spending my time. Yeah, dynamic teams, the different kind of segments within each, let's say, market category of solutions. He's very good at breaking that down into frameworks, talking about the vendors in each of those categories. And just like Josh, we've seen a huge shift from being process-centric to being experience and outcome-centric. I think this is a very, very good change and an opportunity it represents really for organizations. So yeah, I mean, because I've been in this space so long, yeah, I was one of the critics. I mean, we, along with many others, thinking that this industry, the HR tech, HCM solutions industry, was too process-centric. Employees don't think in terms of, containers or containerized processes, if you will. I'm now in the learning process and now in the recruiting process. Obviously, we went from that sort of orientation to the linkages between processes, but that still wasn't a panacea in my view. So we're now really thinking about optimizing processes, but also optimizing experiences and outcomes. And if we can deal with that trifecta, so to speak, then I think organizations will be in much better stead. In terms of the question about what else I see kind of on in the near to midterm horizon, both of us have mentioned the importance of managing change. I don't believe historically HCM systems were directly associated with managing change, other than knowing who's working in the organization and some demographic information and what their skills are, maybe what their potential might be, which is really valuable information. But I think HCM systems and HR technology tools should allow us to personalize, which is really important in managing change, and knowing what the different options are. And where those options should be brought to bear, in which contexts, where should we bring to bear a strategy around bringing in contractors? Where should we allow, to use your phrase, dynamic teams? And that ties in with that notion of HR going forward has to be a hub for research and experimentation, not by unilaterally applying a best practice everywhere. Keep in mind, a best practice is simply the practice that works best, not necessarily the practice that works everywhere.
Right, perfect. Great stuff. With that, we talked a little bit today already in your slides, as well as in our discussion here around org agility and employee experience. And, how do these two connect? Particularly if we understand that, people are no longer just, part of some org chart, which is very static. I mean, the perfect example of Cisco with 7,000 teams that are never represented in the HR system, and they are the ones who are, making things happen. So that's kind of, the agility, the 3-level framework I think we talked about. Are they able, are they willing, and so on. And then on top of it, you have the employee experience, which is kind of the sum of, positive, negative experiences that employees are going through their journey, right? And the mindset and the strategy behind it. So how do these two intersect, both being very vital, to success and, transcending company to, being a leader?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I'm just going to circle back to the MTMs, the moments that matter, but not just for the employee or for the organization, but for both. And particularly in the context of periods of change. And we're talking about moments that matter for the organization, causing a moment that matters for the individual worker. Yes, we have moments that matter for the individual worker. They're thinking about making a career change. Something major is going on in their life. They need to take some time off. Clearly, there are many significant moments that matter at the micro level, so to speak. But here I'm talking about moments that matter for the organization, like the corporate restructurings you meant, that you discussed before, moments that matter for the organization at the macro level, and the effect they have on the individual. And really thinking about what are the needs, interests, and goals of the employee and the organization, and keeping those in balance. That's essentially how I think employee and experience connects in a very organic way with organizational agility.
Perfect, Steve. Thank you. We also talked, or we've seen your framework around the 3-letter powerful acronym that SAP and Oracle and then those leaders use a lot, which is ERP. But here in the context is engagement, retention, and productivity. So tell us a little bit about, what got you to create it, how customers are using. You talked a little bit about that. Not all of these things that are ingredients, would lead to, driving engagement, retention, productivity. You mentioned comp and benefits as a great example, right? So tell us a little bit about how you see companies are using it and what got you to think about creating it.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's again another kind of talking point. Started out as a talking point 20 years ago with PeopleSoft, and then that's how it started. And then you start to think, what are the technology capabilities? What are the process changes that have to be made to drive engagement, retention, and productivity? And within the E, R, and P, how do they kind of interact with each other? Cause and effect, correlations, etc. And so I started to think, like I said before, P, the productivity, seems like the holy grail, because that's, quantifiable way of evaluating business impact, revenue, profit, et cetera, usually inextricably tied to productivity. But what I started to think was important in the realm of P, productivity, was sustaining productivity. And to me, sustained P, so to speak, was really dependent upon the other two outcomes, retention and engagement. That's, to me, that was kind of the thing, the aha moment I had, that it's about sustaining productivity, particularly during times of change when people can be distracted, really thinking about their own situation, et cetera. Their friends might be talking about jumping ship, going to another organization. How do you sustain P during moments that matter? We talked about M&As a little bit ago. If you look at the annals of mergers and acquisitions, and I happen to work one of the many kind of situations I found myself in professionally was working for Wayne Huizenga, the founder of Blockbuster. That's probably why I cited Blockbuster, not in the best way, but the late Wayne Huizenga is one of, as far as I know, is the only person in the history of America that founded 3 Fortune 500s, Blockbuster, Waste Management, and AutoNation. In any event, clearly I had an opportunity to look at a lot of the acquisitions he was making from a people standpoint. And unless HR leads the charge on having that organization well positioned and being proactive in terms of securing its top talent. And securing top talent is not just, as we said before, a matter of paying more guaranteed payments, et cetera, retention bonuses. Yeah, they're all relevant. But, authentic communications, one-on-one between a manager and their team member, really, really important in terms of securing talent. And the last point I'll make, which is maybe a subtle point that I learned in that kind of context of a lot of M&As, is more often than not, the HR department and the organization overall, leadership, doesn't exactly know how everything is going to come together. They don't know how benefits and comp is going to be harmonized totally. They don't have it, mapped out to a fairly well. It takes time. And it's really important that during that period of things coming together and crystallizing, that employees are kept abreast of what's going on. It's better to say our goal is within 30 days to have a communication out clarifying the benefits, employee benefit situation. Much better than saying nothing and waiting 30 days, because in that 30-day period, you could be losing be losing people, I should say. Go ahead.
A lot of doubt and fear of missing out on things that nature that happen in those 30 days. Agree. Very good. So there's quite a lot of stuff we can cover in this topic, but maybe just to shift a little bit gear now for vendors and not from a customer point of view, like as vendors like ourselves and others that you're consulting with, as we're engaging with prospects and customers, particularly now in difficult times, which after the pandemic, with a lot of crisis, with a lot of layoffs, with a lot of changes in the working from home and forcing people to come to the office and so on, that we're even coining new terms of people quietly quitting and so on. It's how would you recommend to vendors to build the trust with prospects, and either they're part of their outreach engagement or they're part of a formal RFP with procurement? What are the things that you would recommend to vendors in their engagement with prospects and customers to ultimately build that trust to deliver on some of this org agility and employee experience and so on?
Yeah, Philip, thanks so much for the question. I do get it a lot from vendor clients. 3-4 things come to mind. One, and sorry if I'm stating the obvious here, you must know the customer's business context, including business plans, priorities, challenges, and what makes some of them unique. And here's the subtle point. And what is changing and how do they define success? Number two is the fact that that while Siemens Cloud Platform, other HR tech platforms have certainly the ability to deliver a lot of value, perception is really important. It's in the eye of the beholder. And when new technology represents change, which it basically always does, just keep in mind, vendors need to keep in mind, look at it as a change, and change in and of itself makes people nervous, many people nervous. So it's, that's why I talk about emphasizing the net benefit, because presumably there is a net benefit to swap in one product and swap out another. Yes, there's going to be some features, maybe some functionality that's better on the old platform, but if you look at it from a net benefit standpoint, it's a much easier way to make the case. What sustains partnerships, you already said it, transparency, mutual trust, etc. And don't forget that line managers, anybody that worked with me back in my PeopleSoft days heard me say this, line managers are the true stewards of human capital management. Why? Because the HR department is typically only 1% of the organization.
Right, they don't scale, correct. Very good, very good. So, and then along that lines, we have a lot of vendors who try to integrate with the existing HR systems. Some of them even have on-premise systems, and the resistance to change even to the cloud, it's still there. And there's a big move programs to push customers to go to the cloud. But even for those who are out in the cloud and have their HR core system or the talent management systems, what do you think is the best utilization of such HCM data, whether coming from on-prem or whether coming from the cloud, or such new scenarios and new use cases in the EX space and to facilitate org agility? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, just very, very quickly. I talked about personalization. It's really foundational in terms of a strategy to elevate the employee experience. So any data that allows you to personalize. So it's not just skills from the organization standpoint. Yeah, they're looking at relating jobs to skills, to projects. From the employee standpoint, they're relating it to career goals. And as those goals change, personalization rises to the fore. So any data that allow, potential, somebody's personal situation, they have to take leave when they come back. They want to know that their job is or a comparable job is available. So any data that allows you to personalize. Secondly, I would say, if we think about one of the primary needs that's universal to all employees, it's the need to feel valued. How can you feel valued as an employee if the organization doesn't recognize all your sources of value, and they are not limited to and confined to your job or role? Employees, many, are delivering a whole range of value that doesn't even relate to their job. They're mentoring, they're coaching, they're channeling ideas to the ops team about improvements. There may be leads to the sales team, referring candidates that become great employees. All sources of value. This is the type of data that I strongly urge customer organizations to work with their vendors to make sure there's a way to track those very, very efficiently. And as I kind of mentioned earlier, knowing what kind of approach works best in different situations. Hybrid work environment, allowing employees to work from home a couple of days a week, bringing in contractors, dynamic teams. Those are all major considerations, I would say, in terms of data that you want to house within the HCM. Part of it is this history of what works best where.
Great. Steve, thanks a lot. Before we go into kind of wrap-up questions, I want to check with Raviola. Do we have any questions from the audience that we want to insert at this point?
Yes, I was going to suggest we have 5 minutes left before the end, and we have 2 very good questions. So It's up to you whether you want to continue asking your questions or should we take the questions from the audience?
No, definitely we prefer to get started.
Okay, just a second. Let's see, the first one, a very good question for you, Steve. How can you present and implement HR tech solutions in a risk-averse culture?
Heck of a question. I've probably generated some consulting revenue from that over the years. So, well, how do you introduce any change, of which, HR tech is one of those kind of change scenarios? How you present the change is by talking about what's in it for me. We've all seen that written. It's true. What's in it for me at the real human level, the person level, is really, really important. And if you get a groundswell, or at least the beginning of a groundswell of support for the change, in this case, new HR tech, start with a group that has influence. The notion of who influences whom is pretty important in the context of change and change management. Start with that group that maybe others perceive as resistant to change. And when that group starts to be championing the change, the job is made so much easier. So those are some of my comments there.
Okay, great. Thank you for this. One more very exciting question. It's about, I'm sure everybody's dying to know this. What is the best way to measure the return of investment of investing in employee experience?
Well, what makes it not intuitively, what's not intuitively obvious is one of the aspects that makes it difficult to measure, which is so many drivers. We talked about 6 or 7 today, but there's so many more drivers of employee experience, check-ins with the manager, and so many others. So when you have this raft of drivers of employee experience, you need to know how to try to isolate. It's like in any sort of experiment, you want to try to isolate variables and the impact and the that they're creating. So clearly, some of the things that come to mind, even though we're not talking about causality, we're talking about outcomes, the outcome being a better employee experience. Look at certainly retention rates. Look at, I mentioned employees that refer great candidates. Let's say there's a whole lot of that going on, and then it subsides. Look at employees that are really clamoring to learn more, to have an opportunity to upskill. We're talking about employee behaviors or manifestations of employees feeling committed, enthusiastic, and ready for anything. They're prepared. They know it's a partnership between the employee and the employer. So, I would look at it from the standpoint of outcomes and then infer, well, if that's what's going on, the employee experience will probably be doing well.
Wow, great. Thank you for this.
Sure.
I'd like to give our audience one more chance to type a few last-minute questions, so last call for questions. In the meantime, Philip, have you got any last questions on your own?
Yeah, I'll wrap up on my side. So in terms of questions, as we're evolving the whole situation around us and how the future of work is shaping up and the different trends and so on, where does Steve see the next big thing in kind of the HR tech space, and then how those big things that are developing will influence the the landscape, the business landscape, the HR landscape overall.
Thanks. I'll just, in the interest of time, just say quickly 2 things, and it's really just reiterating or reinforcing whatever we said. The 2 things are allowing technology to be in a position where it's helping an organization manage change. It might be at the front end of the change process in terms of assessing organizational readiness, not just attitudes, ready, willing, and able, but skills, moving people around. etc. That's all part of readiness. Are there other projects going on in the organization that's going to interfere with reassigning people or training people? So managing change, both the front end, assessing org readiness, and the back end, arguably, which is sustaining the change. So managing change is one. And the other one is, as I alluded to it, knowing what are the best options, strategic options, workforce-related options in each given situation, and not applying kind of a painting with a broad brush that, well, all parts of the organization kind of have the same dynamics. They don't. So knowing what's unique about each part of the organization and having, almost a record facilitated by machine learning as to what works best where.
Great. You mentioned machine learning, and where exactly do you see the biggest potential of applying? I know you've blogged and posted a little bit about kind of the top 6, top 5 areas. Can you give us that as a kind of your personal belief where AI and machine learning can really make the day for HR and for for the business?
Yeah, thanks. So if anybody wants to feel so inspired to search on some of my stuff out there, you'll see I have a framework for AI and HCM. It's very simply 5 categories of use cases that I've tested over time. Some of them are aspirational, and some of them are available today as use cases that are, demonstrably things happening to support. And the 5 categories of use cases, AI and HCM, are personalized. The 3 Ps: personalize, prescribe, and predict. Predict, we think about flight risk. Prescribe, what's the best action? Still kind of in a nascent stage right now. We don't see systems doing that too much of that. But personalization and prescribe and predicting, we do see those. The other 2 are curate resources to be more productive. Might be people, mentors, coaches, might be content, learning content, etc. And understand why a lower percentage of candidates are accepting our job offer. Only machine learning can help with that. So I'll give you that.
Perfect. Great stuff, Steve. Raviola, do we have any other questions on your side?
We're officially out of time, but we have 2 very interesting questions. So it's up to you whether you'd like to address 1, 2, or 3 of them, or should we wrap it up right now?
Steve, how are you with time? Do we have a couple of minutes?
I'm fine. Let's take 1 or 2.
Okay, so one of them. Social technologies have never been more present on the work site. Would you say that the further development of employee experience tech will enable more social engagement between employees? Would love to hear your opinion about that.
Well, the short answer, very, very short answer, is yes. And I'll relate it to one of those stages in my employee journey, not because of pride of authorship of my employee journey framework, but because the notion of immersion resonates with me personally, and hopefully with some of the folks listening. So immersion, a big part of immersion is the social element. And of course, we in HR know that diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, that's all part of it. And then you have the culture theme dovetailing right into that. So culture, DEIB, social immersion, HR technology historically wasn't viewed in that sort of context, but certainly can be now with capabilities like personalizing communications, seeing what the indicators and analytics are telling us about attitudes, and relating it to exit interviews, Glassdoor ratings, etc.
Squeezing in one more last very practical question, I promise, the last one. In your experience, how long does it usually take before a successful program for employee experience takes shape and makes a clear change?
Well, yeah, it depends. Like, I know this is not a revelation, but it depends on the scope. With anything, it depends on the scope, and that's why I would do it in phases. I would dimensionalize the outcomes that relate to employee experience, prioritize the outcomes, and here's kind of the real kind of recommendation. When in implementing or instituting any program, think about what are the dependencies and how apt they are or lend themselves to being managed and accounted for. So prioritize, dimensionalize the employee experience aspects, and they prioritize the outcomes, and which of those outcomes have the most dependencies. That should play into the prioritization process. You're balancing significance and impact of the outcomes with what is it going to take to get there. And then communicate around the comprehensiveness of the approach and the program and why it's going to take time. I can't imagine there's many organizations that went from a 2 on a 10 scale relative to quality of the employee experience to an 8 in a year or less. There's just too many piece parts to it. So break it down into priorities, outcomes, and dependencies.
Perfect.
Perfect. Okay, and this concludes today's event. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Steve, for sharing your knowledge. Thank you, Philip, for asking exciting questions. And thank you, the audience, for being here with us today. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.